Howdy, partner. It's been a minute, hasn't it? Yeah, apologies, the ADHD was winning. If you want an update, stick around to the end, but until then... If you were to describe the world of Attack on Titan in just one word, I have a feeling that cruel would be among the first to come to mind, and I don't really think that anybody's going to try and contest that. If you'd like to do so, I would invite you to watch the show again and, look at the screen this time. Because the world these characters live in is one that can easily appear absent of all hope, where people die seemingly randomly and without any definitive meaning. Nearly every character we know from the first 3 seasons has been literally brainwashed to forget who they are and where they came from. If you ask me, the society within the walls is the best kind of dystopia. The kind that you look at and at first might think it doesn't look that bad. These 100 years have been relatively peaceful. The incidents that we see in Before the Fall are all but non-existent. The criminal underworld, corruption at the highest levels of government, the secret police, and the lie that their whole society is built on are all things that the average citizen could live their entire life without ever thinking about. But what about those who have been damned to be aware of their situation? How is one to live knowing that the world they live in is a lie? How can anyone be expected to sleep soundly knowing the enemy is at the gates? Especially when that enemy is insurmountable. No amount of strength, willpower, endurance, or wit can ensure that you or anyone around you will survive. How does one change this hellscape? How do you adapt to living in hell? Simple. Become the devil. Erwin Smith is that devil. Cold, calm, calculating, and in many cases, better adapted to life in the cruel world than even the mutants and superhumans that are engineered to live there. At a glance, a total sociopath with a lack of concern for anything but his own goals. And upon a deeper analysis, a selfless leader who was undoubtedly, during his lifetime, humanity's greatest hope. But who is Erwin Smith, and how did he become the man that we see on screen? This is one that I've been really excited to take a crack at, because I will be the first to tell you Erwin is without a doubt my favorite Attack on Titan character. And here's why. We don't know too much about Erwin's upbringing, but the details we are made aware of are critical to understanding him as a character. We know that he was rather inquisitive even as a child. His father was a schoolteacher who secretly held misgivings about the false histories that he was forced to teach, secretly believing that humanity still existed outside the walls, and the government had distorted the narrative to fit their agenda. When a young Erwin questioned him about the idea of humans still living outside the walls, his father shared his beliefs with his son, who eagerly began to discuss his theories with his friends, resulting in Mr. Smith being disappeared by the military police. This left Erwin an orphan, with nothing left of his father but the curiosity they both shared. And so Erwin dedicated his life to 2 things: the protection and preservation of humanity, and the pursuit of the truth about the world around him. We see that Erwin learns from his mistakes rather quickly. He chooses not to tell others of his dream, refusing to let himself or anyone else suffer the same fate as his father. But we also see that this leads Erwin to explicitly distrust authority, specifically those with close ties to the crown or the military police. He only really reveals his dream to a small handful of people, but I'll talk about that in a bit. So, at this point in the story, we have a driven, inquisitive orphan who doesn't trust the government. So what separates Erwin from 4 out of 5 generic dystopian young adult novel protagonists? Well, Erwin is very aware of the state of the world in which he lives. However, the thing that separates Erwin from lesser characters that fill similar roles is realism. Erwin is very realistic about his surroundings. He knows in order to achieve his own goals, people have to die. For the Survey Corps to fulfill its purpose, people have to die. And because of that, while his actions, plans, and orders are calculated, he is more than willing to trade lives when necessary. And this is illustrated very well throughout the female Titan arc. So in that regard, what separates Erwin from the cold, emotionless tacticians who send waves of stormtroopers into walls of blaster fire? And furthermore, what makes him so compelling? Well, luckily, I think the answer to those questions is one and the same. I don't really think anyone is going to argue against the statement that Erwin was a hype machine. I once heard it phrased he could convince a snail to fight a pile of salt and win. I think it's an understatement to call him a charismatic leader, but I also feel that charismatic and inspiring do not go hand in hand. I can think of plenty charismatic figures in positions of power, but I can only think of a few that would convince me to charge headlong towards a giant monkey under a hail of boulders. Don't worry, we'll get there when we get there. Throughout the first season specifically, Erwin is enigmatic and seemingly willing to sacrifice anything to fulfill his goals. But we never see his person endangered. Erwin himself is never the one putting his life on the line. This could easily lead a viewer to the impression that Erwin is aloof, that he's perfectly fine with sending hundreds of scouts to be eaten alive but is unwilling to risk his own life. We of course know that this is not true, but it does involve something I want to highlight, as it is one of the things I feel makes Erwin an effective leader. Erwin constantly takes risks, but in each case we see it is a calculated risk. He is someone who, like Levi, has made mistakes in the past, but rather than wallowing in them, he has learned from them. He never makes the same mistake twice. He is, after all, the person who taught Levi the danger of dwelling in the past. That every tragedy can be given meaning, and that every mistake, no matter how cruel, has the potential to be a lesson. And we can also see that diligence is something that Erwin has carried throughout his entire career. We know before he became the commander of the Survey Corps, his squad boasted a negligible casualty rate compared to the others. He observed the mistakes of his predecessor and not only rooted out opposition to the Survey Corps in the government, but he also drastically reduced the Survey Corps' casualty rate via the long-range enemy scouting formation. He knows from experience that he must trade lives, but he never does so unnecessarily. He knows he must put his personal feelings aside if he's to pursue his dream, but furthermore, he must do so to fulfill his duty as the leader of the Survey Corps. Another trait that I think is very important to any effective leader is knowing when you are not the right person for the job. We see that Erwin is acutely aware of his own strengths and weaknesses, and is more than willing to put his subordinates in charge of things that he is not fully capable of carrying out himself. We see this when he puts Hanji in charge of researching Aaron's Titan shifting, or when he puts Mike in charge of the 104th, and even when he puts Levi in charge of deciding who gets the Titan injection. He asks for and listens to the counsel of his section commanders, but he never lets them sway him away from making the right decision. This man understood the benefits of having a research division and a special operations team in a society that's traditional military technology peaked with the invention of the cannon. He brings out the best in each and every one of the soldiers under his command. He is always vigilant of his enemies inside and outside of the walls, and goes to great lengths to not only stay one step ahead of them, but also to understand them. He excels in grand strategy, but he can also make immaculate judgment calls on the fly. He's adaptable, calculated, and flawlessly evolved to the world he inhabits. For all of these reasons, I don't think anyone could truly, wholeheartedly disagree with Flock's summation that he is the devil. He became the monster he had to be to defend humanity. To chase his dreams, he mastered the cruel world. So to quickly summarize our current understanding of Erwin, he is a gifted leader who has mastered his craft over the course of his entire life. His dream is to reveal the truth of humanity outside the walls, and his duty is to lead the Survey Corps' efforts to free humanity from the wrath of the Titans. He is forced to make cruel decisions in the name of the greater good, and nearly, that is a very strong nearly, every named character he meets is a better person for having known him. He would lead the Survey Corps into a golden age that it had never known before. He forged humanity's greatest heroes into the characters we love, and he is willing to do anything necessary to fulfill the mutual dream he shared with his father. Now, with all that in mind, I want to take a look at 3 scenes that I feel define Erwin as a character. You could call these the moments that made Erwin my favorite Attack on Titan character. There are certainly other highlights, like his speech to the 104th as they choose their regiment, but I feel that these are the 3 that make the character. Now, first, you may recall that earlier we described that Erwin, especially in the first season, could feel aloof, like he was unwilling to make the sacrifices he demanded of others. Well, this belief is entirely put to rest in one scene. As the Survey Corps charges the Armored Titan at the climax of Season 2, Erwin is grabbed by a Titan while leading the charge. Now, this was critical. You make or break the character in this scene. As an author, Isayama either made Erwin a talented but cowardly officer who values himself before the mission, or the kind of hero you eagerly follow into the bowels of hell. So, remind me, with his life and the mission simultaneously on the line, what does Erwin say? Also, I'm using the dub audio because this performance kicks ass. Don't be mad, love you.
I said advance, goddammit! Aaron's right in front of you! Do not falter!
I don't even know how to follow that up, but okay, let's try. In this instance, Erwin is humanized to an extent well beyond what we have seen from him in the past. Erwin's dream is important to him, his life is important to him, but his duty, his mission comes first. When push comes to shove, if Erwin must die to push humanity one step closer to freedom, he will gladly lay down his life. It's in this scene that Erwin begins to receive the characterization and find the depth that he needs. So, what comes next? Most of the Uprising arc reiterates the previous scene's significance. We see more of Erwin being a brass-balled badass who is playing StarCraft, while the government's playing chess and the military police are playing checkers. We see him humanized even further, and he has deeper interactions with more characters than ever before. And we see that he is willing to take any risk, go to any length, in order to defend humanity. However, for the next scene that defines Erwin, we are discussing my favorite scene in the entire series. We've got a lot to talk about with this scene, so strap in. Erwin's charge. This scene is perfect. These 3 episodes are perfect. Hell, I think this entire arc is perfect, and Erwin is largely responsible for that. With Zeke raining down a constant volley of boulders, the scouts surrounded on all sides, and Levi's squad locked in a fight to the death with Reiner and Bertolt, Erwin is pushed to his limits. The Survey Corps' veterans are dead. Levi, his closest friend, is planning on sacrificing himself to give the others a bleak chance at escape, and Erwin is forced to make a decision. This is the most conflicted we ever see Erwin as a character. He is within pissing distance of his dream. If he truly wanted to, he could reach out and touch it, but he knows that his duty compels him elsewhere. He knows that in order to give Levi the chance to stop Zeke, it will cost him his life. The preservation of humanity means that he will never fulfill his dream. So let me ask, what would you do? Would you exchange your integrity, your duty, to achieve that which you want most? Erwin has to make that choice in this scene. He must decide whether he is the leader and the hero that we believe him to be, or a fraud. And you and I know how this goes, but I think there's even more to it than that. When Erwin speaks with Levi, when he laments that in order to save humanity, he must part ways with his dream, if you ask me, he solidifies himself as the best character in the series. In this moment, for the first time he is vulnerable. He confides in Levi, and for the first time Levi understands the weight he's carrying. He feels the gaze of those who demand to know what became of the hearts they gave. And in telling Erwin to give up on his dream and die, Levi accepts the torch. He becomes the one who must carry that weight. The following scene, the following monologue, are nothing short of literary perfection. I am sitting here after rewatching it for the script, gathering my thoughts, and I am genuinely at a loss for words. Erwin Smith is a character so moving. He can transform a suicide charge into a moment of nearly unrivaled inspiration. We see in his final moments that Erwin is not only all that we believed him to be, but he is also willing to put aside everything, his dreams, his comrades, and even his own life in order to fulfill his duty, in order to protect humanity. I cannot tell you if during this speech Erwin was trying to convince himself or his subordinates that their sacrifice was worth it, that this was not only the sole method in which they could rebel against this cruel world. I can tell you that I think he believed every word, that in his final act, he and those who surrendered their hearts alongside him were all that he had told them they must be. So with Levi now bearing the weight of Erwin's dream, humanity's greatest leader suffered his final mortal wound. But as you and I know, that's not the end. While Erwin's presence looms over the plot long after his death, I don't want to dive into deep manga spoilers, so in this video, I will discuss one final scene before giving my final thoughts. That being the scene following Bertolt's defeat, the scene in which Eren and Levi are arguing over who should inherit the Colossal Titan. I touched on this scene a bit in my Levi video, but as important as this scene is to Levi, I think it's even more important to Erwin's character. You see, to understand this scene, we need to recall 2 things. First, while I think that Eren and Mikasa contributed to Levi's decision, which I'll get to in a minute, it was Floch whose assertion that Erwin was the devil convinced Levi that he should let Erwin die. We know that Erwin became the devil he was to adapt to his surroundings. He was humanity's greatest leader, willing to trade lives and do whatever reprehensible things were required of him to achieve freedom for the people of the walls. Erwin never wanted to become that devil, but he had to. No one before him was willing to step up, to take the risk, to master the cruel world. At this point, Erwin had sacrificed more in the name of humanity than any other character, or at least any other member of the Survey Corps. After all, the mind games he was forced to play, the losses he was forced to accept, and the burden that he was forced to bear. How could anything be more cruel than to drag him back into the hell he was forced to adapt to? But of course, that is just one half of it. Let's talk about the ocean and Kenny. As Kenny lets us know, everybody has to be drunk on something. And for Erwin, that was the basement, the truth. And with the recapture of Shiganshina, Erwin was in position to realize that dream, which posed a problem. What would become of Erwin without that dream, when he had nothing left to keep him drunk? He could of course find a new dream, but as he himself said, he would have no way of knowing until he reached the basement. Armin, on the other hand, had yet to fulfill his dream. Not only was he the only one capable of matching Erwin's talent, he was still drunk, and on a dream that he could never truly fulfill. As while the Survey Corps would eventually reach the sea, Armin couldn't rest until he saw those endless fields of snow or the burning sands of the desert. While there were ultimately those who would call his decision foolish, those who would doubt him, and certainly not without reason, Levi knew that the only decision he could make, the only one that would secure humanity's future, and the only one that would allow his friend to rest, was to let go, to choose Armin. Now, with that, I don't really want to get into anything that could spoil the events of Attack on Titan, the final season, but for real this time. But in regard to Erwin, I will say this. I think that if you're one of the readers who hated the last arc, we can at least agree that Erwin himself is an untouchable gem, and perhaps even the highlight of the entire series. And if you did enjoy the last arc, I'm sure that we can agree that every scene in which Levi reflects on his choice and his friend is breathtaking. So with that, what can we learn from Erwin? To briefly list a few things before I get to the big one, Erwin shows us the importance of adaptability, perseverance, and the willingness to make difficult decisions. All of these traits merge to make him the perfect devil to lead the Survey Corps into the unknown. But I feel the trait that stands out the most, the one that defines Erwin, at least in my eyes, is integrity. In Perfect Game, Erwin refers to himself as a con man, and despite the summation coming directly from Erwin himself, I wholeheartedly disagree. Was Erwin underhanded? Sure, when he needed to be. Was Erwin seemingly cold and disconnected? When his job required it, of course. But was he a fraud? A con man? He easily could have been. If he had cried for the scouts to save him when he was grabbed by a Titan, if he had bargained with Nile to save his own life during the coup, and if he had fled the field during the Battle of Shiganshina. But Erwin does none of these things. When he asked the 104th if they could give their hearts, if they could die if he said die, one could easily come to the conclusion that he thought himself better than them. That he was a talented but aloof commander who was unwilling to make the same sacrifices he demanded of others. But Erwin proved time and time again that the moment his heart was needed, he would not hesitate to give it. Despite everything, despite his responsibility, despite the gaze of the fallen, and despite his own dream, no matter the odds, no matter what was required of him or his soldiers, Erwin did not buckle or yield when faced with the cruelty of this world. He was forced to become the devil, but he never lost sight of what made him human. He simultaneously perfectly adapted to life in the cruel world and incessantly raged against it. And for those reasons, I think he's the most compelling character in Attack on Titan. So, before we go, I just wanted to say thank you for watching. I really appreciate it if you made it this far. And if you like what you saw here, I have several other videos like this one on my channel, and more to come, so if you feel I've earned it, please check those out and consider subscribing if you'd like to see more. Now, for those of you who are wondering where I've been, the answer is getting my ass kicked. These past 9 months, I have started 3 different videos and scrapped every single one of them. A rough semester, some personal stuff, and 21 years of unmedicated ADHD. We're winning, but the key word there is were. Life is good, the bean has been acquired, And most importantly, I've got more videos to come, so click subscribe and stick around if you'd like to see those. And until next time.